For most Black Americans, especially those in the South, the front porch isn't just part of the entry into the house. It is the place we enter community. It's not just the comfort or safety we experience there, but it's where we do some people watching and good reflection. On the front porch is where we tell the truth with a little sweetener and an awesome time along the way. We take what we learn and we act. On this episode, we discuss all things related to youth, education, community, and the politics of people.
Welcome back to another edition of On the Front Porch with KaCey. This week has been personally, professionally, psychologically, spiritually, if I'm just being honest. It's been a tough week, but I am determined to pass this test. And in that means I historically have been known to be frantic and to have a meltdown, whether public or private, when it seems as though things aren't going according to plan. And not just small things, right? Because we all have a plan. And for some of us, just the slightest tweak can throw it off. But these plans have been greatly impacted by a few factors. And that is not the topic of today's episode, all the stuff KaCey is going through. But it did lead me to something that I wanted to discuss. And it is, what are all the things our young people going through? And not just our young people, but our community. There are times where it seems as though everything begins to fall apart. No matter how much you don't want it to, no matter how much you try to keep it all together. I remember one time, a pastor friend of mine, he was my pastor for a few good years, miss him dearly in terms of just Sunday morning preaching. But he told me one time, sometimes you have to be willing to let things fall apart. That a lot of times in our desperate attempt to keep it all together, we really do both ourselves and the faith that God wants to build in us a disservice, because we are trying to fix it. We are trying to be the glue that holds it together. And there's some things in our life that only God can be the fixer or the glue for. So I don't know if the things happening to me right now are a result of not wanting to let go and to let it all fall apart, or if it's just, this is building a little bit of grit in me, a little bit of, stick it out, keep pushing. So we're going to see. But what I'm most proud about is that I have not given in to what would have broke me down before. And I think that's the real win. So I just wanted to take a snoop moment and thank myself for not having a full meltdown as everything around me looks like it is crumbling. So there's that. Now to our topic. And I don't know who that's for. Maybe somebody else is dealing with some stuff. Just trust yourself and then trust the God, trust the divinity inside of you. All right. I said that everything was having a moment in my life. And one of those things is these here young people of ours. This week has been one of those weeks where I've just been shaking my head. Like, what are we doing? Right? What are we getting ourselves into? And I've been trying my best to not engage in this idea of countertransference, where I make the assumption, because of experiences I've had with other young Black youth, to place those experiences on new young people that I meet. That just because they look like other young people that I have served, just because they sound like other young people I've served, even if they come from the same neighborhoods, does not mean that they have had the same experiences, that the same experiences have impacted them in a similar way. I can't make the assumption that I know this person simply because they display characteristics that I have been familiar with in the past or presently. And as I shake my head, even still, as I think about some of the things that have happened, the real question I begin to ask is, whose fault is it anyway? Because y'all know blame has to go somewhere, right? Now, you can decide if I'm being sarcastic or not. That's entirely up to you. But blame has to go somewhere, or so they say, right? This idea that someone, some entity, something has to be responsible for what it is that we are seeing, it has to go someplace. And a lot of times we place that blame on the person who has made the choice to exhibit behaviors that are counter to what it is that we believe to be productive. Is it always that person's fault? Now, I'm not talking about fully grown people who should take responsibility for their actions, take responsibility for their reactions and their responses, right? The idea of a reaction versus a response is that reaction is that visceral, innate, natural, wannabe, petty, rude, mean, disrespectful because somebody has triggered you, right? And honestly, we ascribe a lot of value to some of these words that we use. And I realize that I just did that. Every reaction is not a negative one, right? But so many times when we hear, oh, somebody reacted, or this is how they reacted, we're waiting to hear the negative connotation or the negative consequence of what that reaction was. But the truth of the matter is that word in and of itself has no value. It's neither good nor bad, right? So again, a reaction is just that natural response that you have without, and here's the difference for a response versus a reaction, is the pause. So you have the thing that has triggered you. Again, that word has no value other than what we place on it. So it's the thing, the catalyst, the trigger. Then we pause to think through how I now respond, what my actions are after this. Am I ready and willing to take full responsibility of the consequence, both positive and or negative, if I follow through with whatever my first thought was? That is the difference between reacting and responding. Reacting, there's no thought. It is, this happened, I did this. They said this, I said that. Responding is, this thing happened, I paused to do a quick assessment of how I'm feeling, and then I make the decision of how I'm going to respond to the thing that happened. So as I think about some of the actions that young people engage in, a lot of it is reactionary for them, right? A lot of it is something happened, they've been taught, this is what you do. We have not taught our young people, because most adults have not mastered this, to pause after the thing has happened, to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to go with your first mind, or you're going to go with the mind that's got a little bit of common sense, right? And maybe those two things are the same. A lot of times they aren't, depending on the situation, right? Even in things that make us feel good. Some of us know we ain't supposed to be with that person. Some of us know we shouldn't have made that phone call. No matter how good it's going to feel, right? We still make the decision even after we've thought about it, because it's worth the risk for us. No matter what the response is, be it positive or negative. So most adults have not mastered the idea of the pause, right? To determine if you're going to react or you're going to respond. This is where I'm like, maybe it's not our young people's fault for some of the stuff they get themselves into, because you only know what you know. And a lot of us know what it is that we engage in, or our thought processes, or how we determine what is a proper response versus an improper response because of things that we were taught. So if there's no teaching of the pause, why would we expect a 14-year-old to know to do that? That goes back to the idea of who's to blame, right? And I'm not pointing the finger at individuals, right? I'm not pointing the finger at what his mama should have known. I'm not saying his daddy should have known. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that as a community, as a people, we have not learned how to teach folks how to think, if that makes sense, right? We haven't done it. We just assume things should be known because it came easy to us. But a lot of times, the things that we know, we have just forgotten the lesson in it. We have forgotten who the teacher was to ensure that we have these things that are now part of our paradigm, that are part of our psyche. And a lot of these things have been embedded in us when we were really, really little. So little that we probably don't remember being told no 13,000 times in one day when we were a toddler. We don't remember when we did something that disappointed our caregivers and they explained to us, even in our 4-year-old minds, why that was disappointing to them. But the psyche, the subconscious, and your spirit remembers even when you consciously cannot recall. And so again, it begs the question, what has been embedded in the young people's psyche? What has been embedded in their spirit that even if they consciously can't recall it, something in them says, oh, hold on, this ain't it. Let me take a beat, right? Let me think about this for a moment. Let me assess the risk. Now, life is the best teacher. Believe me on that. Life is the best teacher. But there's some things I just don't want life to teach me. Like, I'm just being honest. There are some folks that are going to have to hit their heads up against a brick wall repeatedly until their forehead is bust wide open to the white meat and they are bleeding, and they're still only going to get half of the lesson. Then there's some of us who can see that person keep beating their head up against that brick wall and say, yep, that is exactly what I'm not going to do. Like, after you hit your head the second time, I realized that ain't it. That's not the way I want to go. But I'm going to watch you keep busting your head up against that brick wall, because it just continues to reinforce in me why that decision is not the one that I will ever make in my life concerning this. That's me, right? My older cousins talk about how I rarely got in trouble. Now, anybody who knows my grandmama on my mama's side, she was not the knitting kind of grandmama. She was not the let me bake cookies with you kind of grandmama. She was not the kind of grandmother who was going to sit and sing lullabies with you, right? Alice taught us family comes first. Y'all can fight each other in this house, but you're going to fight over each other in them streets. You're going to love each other. You're going to learn how to forgive each other. You're going to learn how to cohabitate with each other. And if all else fails, if you have nobody else, you know that you have family. But grandma also believed in discipline. And I remember plenty of times my cousins who were grown, working full-time jobs, and she would take the hook in her cane, grab them by the back of their knees and their ankles to stop them in their tracks because she asked them to do something and they got to muttering under their breath or sucking their teeth or when I get back or something other than, yes, ma'am, I'm going to do it right now. She'd get them all the way together, even in their grown adult manhood version of themselves. And I watched this And so I knew, okay, but whenever she said stop, that's what I'm going to do. If that meant in my tracks, and then ask her, can I go sit down? Because she won't going to do me the way she was doing my cousins. Like, I refused to have Alice have to come for me. Like, I knew enough, even as a child, this ain't what I want. So although I can look at other people and say, okay, yep, your life has taught me a whole lot. I'm good on that. Other people, not so much, right? Life has to become their best teacher. The challenge with that, and maybe it's not, but for me, the challenge with that is you never know. You don't know when or if you'll ever get to take the test again. And that is what I want young people to realize, that some of the decisions that they're making, they're living in this false sense of reality that tomorrow is promised. They're living in this false sense of reality that just because there were no consequences for it today, that there won't be consequences for it tomorrow. And you want people to live life on their own terms. You want people to enjoy life. But then there are decisions that we make that, while it may make sense right then, it can impact whether you have a tomorrow or not. But again, whoever took the time to explain that and really teach our young people that, or did we just assume they were supposed to figure it out? I see so many adults who always say, oh, well, I don't have any sympathy for them. They should have known because this young person is 16, 17, 18, 19, even 20 years old. And I'm like, but you don't even know their story. You know nothing about their background to make the assumption that they should have known. Well, some things you just know. Nothing we just know unless the Spirit tells us. And even then, you have to cultivate that relationship in order to hear from the Spirit. How do I know that? Because somebody taught that to me. Somebody explained to me that if you want to walk in a way that brings glory to God, if you want to live your life in a way that is faith-filled, right? If you want to exhibit the characteristics of being the type of woman that when I speak something, it has to manifest, that doesn't just happen because I want it to. That happens from spending time and building relationship with God, which is important to me, but whatever that divinity is for you. Like if you look at people who are devout in whatever it is that they practice, they are spending time developing that muscle, developing that inner ear, developing the equivalent of the Holy Spirit for them, right? It's this idea of those who practice the Islamic faith who pray 5 times a day. No matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, that is important to them. That builds their faith muscle, right? And so whatever that may look like, even for folks who are involved in witchcraft and sorcery and all kinds of stuff, they have rituals that they participate in on a regular basis because it builds that muscle in them to ensure that they are connected to the source that they believe gives them life or sustains them. But that is something you're taught either through rearing, through exposure, through formal or traditional teaching. And again, we make the assumption that young people have had that experience for them to know whether or not this is right, this is wrong, or to learn how to pause, to understand fully what the consequences are for their decisions. So again, as I think more about this, and I kind of thought about the title of this, like, who's to blame? But again, if I had to answer that question, the question is community. We all are to blame. Like, we all share some responsibility in it. And because we've dropped the ball someplace, a lot of places, and a lot of balls, um, we have some issues that we have to address, especially when it comes to Black boys and young men. So the Brookings Institute released an article or a report, a finding, back in December of 2020, so not that long ago. And it talks about the 6 policies to address related to social problems that are affecting, again, Black boys and men. And I would venture to say that because it affects Black boys and Black men, that means it affects Black women and Black girls. It affects Black community, right? Because that's the other challenge that we have. It is thinking that one does not influence the other. I remember telling a friend of mine years ago that his decisions absolutely impacted me. Right now, people can say all day long, oh, what I do is nobody else's business. Okay, that's like 90% correct. Because how you show up in the world impacts me. Now, how I respond to how you show up is solely my responsibility, right? It's completely on me. I can make the decision as to whether or not your negativity that day, your attitude that day, your poor choices that day can steal my joy, rattle my peace, throw me off for the rest of the day, right? That is a decision that I make. But the fact that I have to make a decision about how I respond to your foolishness means that it has now impacted me. No man is an island. For as much as we would like to believe that we can do whatever we want to do, make any decision we want to make, and that we are the only persons that are responsible for it, is a narcissistic view. And it's a view that does not align with who we are as a people. As a people, we are a communal group. As a people, we are based and steeped in community. And this idea, honestly, of it's just me and just mine and solo and individual is a very Western and European and Eurocentric view of how we make decisions, because that's not who we are as a people. And I'm talking to Black folks right now. That's not naturally how we engage in this world. So if something that you do impacts me, that's not to say that you don't make decisions that are good for you and your family. That doesn't say that you don't make decisions without having to have the input of everybody around you. But you do need to understand that there is some responsibility that you carry in the decision that you make, especially for the people that are in close proximity to you. So say all that to say that while this says 6 policies to address social problems affecting Black boys and men, the larger view of that is that it is 6 policies to address social problems affecting the Black community. Because I don't know about you, I can't read through these things and then not correlate immediately how Black women and children and Black girls are not as affected by some of these things that I'm getting ready to share with you. So they go on to say that the theme for this particular event that they had, where these findings are coming from, was that policymakers must pay particular attention to the intersection of institutionalized racism, sexism in society, and they must be intentional with their support for Black boys and men. Anything less than systemic change will allow the current system to continue to function as it was originally designed, to the detriment of Black men. Did you hear that? When people always say, oh, the system is broken. The system ain't broken. Ain't nothing broke about the system. Not a thing is out of place about the system. The system ain't slowing down. The system ain't malfunctioning. The system ain't got no defect. The system is doing what the system was designed to do. It ain't broke. What we need to do is break the system. The system is doing what the system was designed to do, right? It's giving what it was supposed to have gave. to keep communities of color right where they're at. Thinking they getting ahead, and then boom, here comes something to push you back 5 steps. And now we have to start this process all over again because we refuse to organize enough to break the system, thinking that the system is there to help us when the system has been designed to hurt us all along. We can go back, right? We ain't even got to go back as far as slavery. And we've talked about that in the Freedmen's Bureau and all of that on a previous episode. I mean, we can talk about how the way the civil rights movement and integration happened really was a detriment to Black communities instead of it being a help. We ain't even got to go that far. And we can go to the Voting Rights Act and, we can talk about all those things. But the reality is redlining, right? Played a major part. Credit practices and banking practices in our community play a larger part. The funding for our schools play a major part. I participated in a conversation recently around how resources impact our communities and where those dollars go and what sense does it make, literally and figuratively, as we think about rebuilding our communities in some instance. And, for me, it's like, let's just be honest about what it is. Like, there's some people who don't want to break the system. Because remember, it ain't about fixing the system. The system ain't broke. We need to break it. Right? That's the language that I use. And if we're honest about it, that's the language all of us should be using. So when people talk about let's fix the system, ain't nothing wrong with the system. And again, let's remove the value judgment of the words and just look at systems are designed to produce a desired result. You have a system to get ready in the morning to get to work on time, right? You have a system of cause and effect, even when you look at an assembly line, when you look at the industrial warehouses in terms of moving one car with just the frame and the shell and the body, and then you got to put the doors on it and the hood on it and all of that and move it for it to be painted and put all the bells and whistles and stuff in it. Like there's a system involved to ensure that it goes from ideation on a piece of paper and from a prototype to a vehicle that is on a car dealership lot. There's a system, there's a protocol, there is a process, which means somebody had an intent for what this thing was supposed to produce, and here's the desired result. Now, the problem is most Black folks don't like the desired result because we were never in the room with the intent in the first place to design the system. Again, let's break the system and stop worrying about trying to fix the system, or let's create a new system. But that requires us to be unified. That requires, and when I say us, that means everybody, because we need our white allies to help us in this work too. This ain't a just Black person thing. This is a everybody's thing. If you really want a different system to produce a different result, then either we got to break the current one or we have to create a new one. So back to these 6 social issues that the Brookings Institute defined in 2020. And a lot of them, all of them really hold true. But again, hear me when I say, they said that this impacts Black boys and men. But last time I checked, Brookings Institute was not a historically Black institution in terms of think tanks or thought leadership. So I wouldn't expect for them to understand that because it impacts Black boys and men, it means that it impacts the Black community as a whole. But the first one that they say here is a criminal justice reform, right? That to truly address social issues and problems facing and affecting Black boys and men, there must be a significant reform to the criminal justice system. Now, this could be a whole 5 episodes on its own. I think you all remember, hopefully you've been listening and you've gotten caught up on the podcast episodes, that I talked about how even the organization and the order that schools have are reminiscent of prisons, or at the very best in industrial environments, right? Assembling lines and working in a factory. You got to stand in line, right? To wait to get your food on a tray. And okay, so without telling all my business, right? I got family members that have been in and out of prison. Like, it is what it is. Like, I don't have to tell y'all what the inside of a prison or a jail looks like. From what I've watched on movies, I've seen it firsthand. The cafeteria line in school, in most urban schools, not all, right, looks exactly like the cafeteria line in prison. Ain't nothing else to say. Unless you've been and seen it for yourself. If you don't want to take what you see on TV as an example, take my word for it. And if you don't want to, then that's your business too. They are exactly the same. So if we're going to reform criminal justice system, then we got to reform this thinking that we're embedding in our children, even from kindergarten. I mean, kind of the reason why I have an issue with uniforms too. Like, I know uniforms are there to keep bullying at bay. I know uniforms are there to help give some sense of community and unification amongst the students and to promote school pride. I know it's to reduce the barrier for parents in terms of purchasing clothes and trying to keep up with the trends and to minimize, children feeling inferior to the other because of name brands and all. I understand, right? And I agree with it in some sense. But on the other hand, y'all, I can't get over the fact that we still continue to build these small reminders that don't look different from the thing we say we want to keep them from. Black men are drastically overrepresented in the prison population, accounting for 32% of the prison population, but only 6% of the overall U.S. population. They're 5 times more likely to be incarcerated during their lifetime than white men, and they are likely to serve longer sentences than white men on average by 19%. I'm going to let that just sizzle in your spirit a little bit, okay? And here's why the recidivism rate goes and stays up. For those who have done their time, paid their retribution, completed their parole or their probation, why are their rights not automatically reinstated? Now, I do have very strong opinions about what type of felony you've had, right? If you are a rapist, you don't need them. You are a vicious murderer outside of self-defense that is well documented. No, put your behind up underneath the jail, right? So there are some very rare instances where I don't believe, because I don't believe that you should be back in the general public if you are one of those two things. But for everybody else, why is it that when you complete what it is that the state says that you owe them for committing this crime, that you don't automatically get your rights reinstated? Now, there are some states that have that, right? So kudos to them. I can't rattle them all off right now. I don't remember them by heart, but I do know that there are a few states that once someone who was convicted with a felony and they have served their time, they have paid their retribution, they have completed their parole, their probation, they are able to vote. There are even some states, right? In fact, check me on this one, that allows inmates to vote. However, it shouldn't be just a handful of these states and these jurisdictions across the country. It should be something that everybody receives once they have completed what has been asked of them, demanded of them, for them to re-enter society and continue to be contributing members, right? So criminal justice reform is one such thing that is impacting our entire community. The next is improving the education system. Now, I'm going to try my best to be objective here. Right? I'm going to try my best to be objective here. Y'all know I got real strong feelings about education system. Oh gosh, I have to tell y'all this. So I was talking to one of my friends this earlier this week. No, it was end of last week. And I was explaining to him how public schools are able to draw down federal dollars and how, not wholly, but a large part of it is tied to number of school days, the attendance rate, all of that, which also influences whether or not schools close. Now, I know what people tell us, but y'all know me. I'm just going to make it plain for you and tell you what it is, right? So this idea of improving education system, the question I always ask is, are schools in the business of educating children? Are our schools in the business of education? Those are two different things. And what I mean by them being two different things is making sure that children are educated and that they are learning isn't always the same as the business of buildings, land acquisition, tax allocation dollars, working alongside partners that have a vested interest because they're moving corporate headquarters into wherever. There's a lot to be said, right, about those things that happen all across the country. It's not unique to one particular school system or district at all. But we have to be honest about the full breadth of it, because every decision is not made out of the abundance of a student-centered or child-first thought. It is, how do I keep everybody that keeps this thing moving happy? And sometimes the student, the child, the family is the second or the third or the fourth priority on that. Now, people can say that they're always student first, family first, but their decisions and their subsequent actions are going to speak way louder than what it is that they have said in this rhetoric that they have really just created in their mind that they're hoping other people buy and receive. So Brookings says, as compared to Black women, white men, and white women, Black men have lower levels of educational attainment. Only about 28% of Black men between the ages of 25 and 29 have a bachelor's degree or higher, while about 30% of women, over 40% of white men, and nearly 50% of white women do. Now, we know Black women are the most educated group, right, currently. A lot of that is proportionately based on, okay, there's way more white people, right, numerically. But proportionately, Black women are the most educated group in this country. Comparatively, Black men have fewer opportunities to receive higher education, because we go back to those numbers of them being a part of the criminal justice system. If they have a felony record, they are limited to the amount of federal student loans they even have access to. And who paying for college out their pocket? I mean, have you even looked at the tuition for state schools lately? Unless you got a 6-figure job, ain't nobody paying for school out of their pocket. So if you're not paying for school out of your pocket and you need the assistance of a federal loan, and that again is a whole 5 episodes on itself, you're likely not to go because you can't afford it. All right, moving on. Improving employment rates and opportunities. On average, Black men experience higher unemployment rates, lower labor force participation rates, and lower earnings than their white male counterparts. Right? I was going to go somewhere. I'm going to hold that. These trends are not only indicative of lower economic power, but also lower access to quality healthcare and fewer social connections, which is why you can see the brother who makes it up out the hood has everything going for himself, finds himself right back in the hood, and everything is lost in the matter of a moment because he did not have a new social network or outlet, because there's not that many of them around. Those of us in Atlanta, we have to know that we are an anomaly. We have to understand that Atlanta is still the home of the magical Negro. And I have said that before. We have to know that we are a unicorn in the sense of how many Black folks are just doing the doggone thing here in the city. And we have a plethora of people to choose to spend our time with that meet our values, that meet our social climb, right? That meet the things and the silos and the little pockets that we want to engage in. Everybody does not experience what it is that we have taken for granted in Atlanta. Place-based policies is number 4. In 2017, 26% of Black households lived in high poverty neighborhoods, as compared to just 5% of white households. I want you to hold that for a moment. 26% of Black households lived in higher poverty, as compared to 5% of white households. I want you to sit with that just a moment. Oh, I meant it when I said sit with it for a moment. High poverty neighborhoods are typically characterized by poor quality schools, less access to jobs, social networks. Some of these things are overlapping. We see this? Oh, okay. Moreover, evidence suggests that boys tend to be more sensitive to their environment growing up, which often materializes in behavioral issues, lower educational attainment, and lower earnings and more. Again, there are things that are repeating themselves. Mentorship programs should be designed to be a vital part of our communities. Providing young Black boys with access to a Black male role model has the potential to benefit them across several areas. Challenges. We have folks who only want to mentor a certain kind of Black boy. That's the honest truth. You want to mentor the Black boy that is non-problematic, that is not going to give you an issue, right? You want to mentor the Black boy who, maybe doesn't have a consistent father figure, but they're not giving their mamas too much trouble and grief. But are they not the ones that need the most mentoring? Are they not the ones who need the most support? Just a question. And then the final one is reparations. The nasty R word. It is suggested that the racial gaps present in wealth, income, housing value, educational attainment, health status, employment, incarceration rates, and more are all the result of deep racism within the U.S. stemming from the egregious act of slavery. But we can't talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about how that still impacts us in the year of our Lord 2022, right? We don't want to think about the fact that there's still repercussions that this country is experiencing because of the transatlantic slave trade and the bulk of the slaves being here in the South. And at one point, there were more Africans and indigenous people on this soil than they were Europeans. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about how Black communities and Black folks just want their equitable shake at this American dream, right? That's all we want, and what we don't want is revenge. I'm just saying, let's call the thing what it is. And we don't like having these hard conversations. We don't like saying the things that make people uncomfortable. Well, get uncomfortable, because until you feel discomfort, you're not going to change anything. As long as you're comfortable, you're going to think that everything is okay. As long as you're comfortable, you're going to psych yourself out that, nothing needs to be done in this particular area. So get uncomfortable. Be grateful that Black folks want reparations, that Black folks want equity, that Black folks just want a chance. And what Black folks don't want is revenge. Now that can open up a whole nother can of worms, because people's like, but I'm not the one who did it. Okay, I'm not the one who made you feel inferior either. That's something your great granddaddy passed down generations, that don't let that Black person get too close to what it is you want, because they going to take it because they may be smarter than you. Don't come for me. right? Check your bias, check your teachings and your learnings about who you are and what you think I am, and still not understand that you are perpetuating the same systemic and institutionalized racism. And let me say this, Black folks who don't understand that, y'all are the worst. Because you give other people this false narrative that, oh, it's just a handful of us Black folks over here that want to cause trouble and stir the pot, because you over here playing nice with folks, because you have psyched yourself out that because you made a little bit of money and you bought the kind of car you want and you can go shop in Phipps Plaza whenever you want to, that what is happening to the rest of the community that you are a part of doesn't impact you. I'm going to tell you, like I tell people who speak ill about the young men that I work with and that I serve with and serve alongside. If you don't have nothing to contribute to this conversation and make sure that there are more of us can get to the place where we making the money you making, shopping where you shopping, living where you living, driving what you driving, just keep your mouth closed. Just be quiet. If you're not going to join the fight, don't hurt the fight. We can't keep acting like all is well for everybody and it's an individual thing. You just need to strive more. You need to try more. You need to do more. You need to let all that stuff go. I don't blame not one white person for anything that has happened to my people. Not as individuals. I don't even necessarily blame them as a collective. What I blame is the system. What I blame is the institution, right? What I blame is the rhetoric that is passed down, that is embedded even into corporate practices and how we show up in terms of serving community. And y'all, let's just be honest. It's usually folks that don't look like Black people that are driving the engines behind those systems and those institutions. It is what it is, and what it is very plain. Whether we want to accept it or not is up to us. Whether or not we want to assume the responsibility of why we keep seeing young people repeat the same foolish mistakes over and over again is up to us. So if we're going to blame somebody, we're going to blame ourselves. Because when you know better, you do better. But part of doing better is going back and making sure that somebody else knows better. And that's the part that we miss. That's the part that we miss. You know, I have said this quote before, and it's true. And Dr. King said it. It's cruel to tell somebody to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they don't even have boots. And there's always an exception to the rules, always one that makes it out against all hell that has been thrown their way. There's always one that makes it out no matter how adverse their circumstances and their environments were. Like, we get that. We applaud that. But even they don't always come back and say, let me make sure there's one more that makes it out of the situation that I was born into, that I didn't ask to be in. And I clawed and I fought and I prayed and I hoped and I studied and I worked my way out of it. What skills and tools did you learn that you went back and shared with the generation behind you? We don't do that as an entity. For those of us that experience that, God bless you. But I can rattle off some names of folks who've never had anybody say, I lived on the streets you lived on. I barely made it out of school like you did. But one day something clicked for me, and this is what it was. And I want to share it with you. When I ask the boys that I work with, how many folks do you know between the ages of 25 and 35 that grew up in your neighborhood that come back to the block just to say, how are you doing, young brother? What is it that you're trying to aspire to? How can I help you? And then we have these groups of professional folks that build these spaces, and yet we still take them out of their neighborhoods, which is important. They need exposure. But when do we ever come and say, right where you are is enough? Let me tell you and let me show you how you use even what you have to make it work for you. If we stop looking at our communities and stop looking at our young people as problems and as issues and understanding that the solutions are right there, then maybe we won't have to absolve so much of the blame. Maybe the responsibility can be shared, and maybe we won't continue to have the same cycle of challenges and issues repeating themselves over and over and over again, because we realize that, yeah, I got to own this for right now. But in order for me to have to give this up, this is the work that we do. And find your lane. Everybody's not going to do everything. Everybody don't need to be a mentor. Please, there are some people, do not mentor nobody. Please don't. Keep working on you. Write the check. Write the check, sister. Write the check, brother, to the organizations and to the people doing the work, right? There's some folks that, yeah, your lane is getting in his behind, right? He needs some tough love. Then there's somebody else's lane who says that baby hasn't had a nurturing spirit around him at any point in his 17 years of life. Just go hug him. Even though he cussed you out, go hug him. Find your lane, work in your lane, perfect your lane, and then maybe we can begin to see our communities and our young people, more importantly, thrive and do something different. So thank y'all for joining me on the front porch on today. I have a good time talking to you all. Hopefully you are talking back to me on the other side of this. Please be sure to follow me on social media at KaCey Venning. That is KaCeyVenning. Drop me a line. Let me know what kind of topics you want to hear more about. Let me know what you think, right? We're not a monolith, and I'm not expecting or assuming everybody agrees with everything that I say. Let's have respectful discourse and dialogue about it, because we have to talk about these things. We have to talk about these issues, because if we don't, then we're going to continue to see ourselves impacted by it, because what one feels, the community feels, right? It's kind of like when you have a toothache, like your whole body shuts down. Like, yeah, I want to be the toothache, right? I want to be the toothache that irritates the rest of your senses, because it's important for us to understand where we're going. And this is about truth telling. It ain't personal. And if you make it personal, then, as the old folks say, hit dog will holler. See you next time.